So my name is Christy Whitfield. I am the director of the Department of Small and Local Business Development. I am excited to be joined to you together in this non-traditional way to talk about non-traditional financing. So we are joined with a great panel. So we are going to jump right in. So I'm going to ask our panelists to quickly introduce themselves, and then we've got a great, I think, really exciting panel together. We're gonna quickly have a short overview of crowdfunding to get ourselves onto sort of an even platform of what we are sort of talking about, what is crowdfunding, and then we're going to sort of talk about some, examples of crowdfunding, some best, case scenarios and some lessons from crowdfunding, and then jump into questions. Let me say really briefly, why do I, as the director of DSLBD, think this is important? It's because in this, we've used every adjective to describe these times. I mean, I am coming to you hidden in a nook in my house, hiding from my children, so this is like non-traditional. Doesn't begin to describe the ways that we have begun to find ways to work. In these COVID times, but even pre-COVID times, we know that small businesses are, entrepreneurs are the ones that are doing innovative things and finding innovative ways to bridge gaps. But we know that in the during COVID, and hopefully soon to be COVID times, we wanted to just open the doors of possibility to people talking about how are you addressing your finance, your money needs, and what are you going to do today, tomorrow, and next month, next year, as you move your own businesses forward. And we want people to be aware of what is crowdfunding and what does that mean, and what would these be as a resource for you. So enough jibber jabber from me. And I think we're going to start first with Kathleen. Kathleen, I don't want to butcher your last name. Minogue?
Minogue.
Minogue. All right, so we'll start with Kathleen. So we got three great experts here today, Kathleen, Bill, and Barry. So we're going to start with Kathleen, and then she can kick it to Bill, and then to Barry, and then we'll keep it moving from there. So Kathleen, thank you for joining us. Tell us about your company, and then I think you're going to give us sort of a primer on crowdfunding, right?
Yes. Thank you, Christy, and thank you to the DSLBD and to Kate for helping to put this together. I'm founder and CEO of Crowdfund Better. We help businesses navigate the crowdfunding ecosystem. Our focus is on education and training to help you crowdfund better. I'll keep it brief so that we can focus on the education. So I wanted to start by making sure that everyone has a basic understanding of crowdfunding so that when we dig into questions and how-tos, we're on the same page. So by definition, crowdfunding is a large number of people sharing small amounts of their, not just their financial capital, but their social and creative capital via the internet. And one of the key things about it is that it's in a limited time window. So it forces people to take action now. Next slide, please. So why is crowdfunding so important? Well, this slide shows how we have big banks and venture capitalists. Those are external sources of capital and institutions. But prior to crowdfunding, there was no place for individuals and the community to have a say and to contribute to the financial success of businesses in their communities. So crowdfunding fits a hole, a capital gap that has existed for a long time. Next slide, please. So as I said, what can your community contribute? It's not just financial capital, but also social capital, helping to build awareness for your business, for your campaign, their own creative capital. You can enlist the support of your community to create your video or your text or to help you with promotion. So when you think about what your community can contribute in a crowdfunding campaign, it's important to think outside of the box and think about more than the financial things that they can bring to your campaign. Next slide, please. The other thing about crowdfunding is, as opposed to other types of financing, more traditional types of financing, it's not a FICO score, it's not your equity injection, it's trust. You build trust with your network, whether that's the branding of your business or trust in the community that you're a person who, when they say they're going to do something, they do something, and you turn that into funding. Next slide, please. And it's also a multiple bottom line. So not only can your contributors contribute more than financial capital, you as a business can also get more than just funding. And in fact, really, that's I'd say it's the lesser known magic of crowdfunding. That through crowdfunding, you can get information about your audience. You can develop proof of concept, validate an idea. You can get community buy-in. You can build your digital assets, your PR. You can get leverage for grants and investors and loans. And I believe Barry's going to talk a lot more about that in his section of the presentation. Next slide. So what types of businesses can crowdfund? I bet that there are a lot of questions. And here's where there's really great news. The ecosystem of crowdfunding has grown from the early days when it was simply a Kickstarter campaign. And so now any stage of business, from idea to startup, to growth, established, any size of business, from solo entrepreneur with an idea to a Fortune 500 company. There are few limits on how much can be raised. You can raise $100 or $1 million. I think Bill's going to talk a little bit about how you can prepare for those different fundraisers. There's low barriers to entry. As I said, it's not like traditional funding. No one's going to look at your FICO score. You don't have to have equity injection or collateral. So it's a really flexible form of funding. And it also supports diversity. The backers in crowdfunding reflect the true marketplace. So not a small group of investors or lenders, but the true demographics of the marketplace. And there's data that supports that women, minority, and rural businesses are very successful with crowdfunding. Next slide. So let's talk about the different types so that you can see where your business might fit in the ecosystem. There are four main types: donation, rewards, lending, and investment. Next. So here's an example of donation. You probably have seen GoFundMe campaigns. Those fall under donation for personal causes. But donation crowdfunding is also used very successfully by 501c3s and nonprofits to raise additional funding for their operating. Next. There's crowd lending. One of the best known platforms is Kiva. This allows you to crowdfund a loan from your community. And with Kiva's platform, that loan is at 0% interest. Generally, they allow you to raise up to $10,000, but during COVID, they've raised that to $15,000. So this is a term loan that is crowdfunded from your community, and then you pay it back. Next. Then there's rewards or seed crowdfunding. And this is Kickstarter, Indiegogo. You're going to ask for contributions from your community in exchange for rewards or perks. It's often used for pre-sales or prepayment for products. And this is a really flexible type of crowdfunding where you, the business owner, decide what you are going to exchange with your community for their contribution. Next. The most recent development in crowdfunding is investment crowdfunding. And this is the only type of crowdfunding where your contributors are actually investors in your business. There are a lot of different ways to raise capital using investment crowdfunding. The thing to know there is, beyond marketing expenses, there are legal and financial compliance expenses that your business would have to be able to finance in order to launch an investment crowdfunding campaign. Next slide. And here's just a simple breakdown. There's lots of exemptions, which means exceptions that you have to use to do investment crowdfunding. So this is just a general overview of the federal regulations, because there's both federal regulation crowdfunding, Reg D, Reg A+, but then state by state, and there are other rules that apply that allow you to raise investment from your community. Next. So really briefly, I also wanted to address, how do you know if crowdfunding is for your business? And it's really 3 questions. Are you ready? Are you willing? Will it be of value? And so readiness, the first question I have for you is, are you willing to ask people for money? Because if you're not, then crowdfunding might not be a good fit for you. Also, are you ready? Do you have a community? And Bill's going to talk more about how to reach that community. But do you have a community that you can reach out to? If you don't, so this brings us to willingness, are you willing to do the work to build that community online? And also, are you willing to do the work to raise the capital? There's a myth in crowdfunding that if you put your campaign on a platform, that people are just going to run to it, and you really have to promote and bring people to your campaign. So are you willing to do that work? And then, will it be of value? There's no question that crowdfunding is work. And so I had that list of non-financial values. I would recommend that if you are not able to find 2 or 3 things on that non-financial list that you also want for your business besides money, then you might want to consider something else besides crowdfunding. But if you want market validation, if you want to acquire customers, that crowdfunding could be an excellent tool for you to not just raise capital, but also to strengthen the connections with your community. With that, I'm going to pass off to Bill. And I'll also going to leave in the chat a link to our crowdfunding cheat sheet. It's a free resource that lists reputable platforms and the different types. So if you got a little lost, you can go check that resource out. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. That was a really great introduction to crowdfunding, and it's really powerful. Crowdfunding is really powerful. My name is Bill Huston, and I'm co-founder and CMO at Project Crowd. What we do at Project Crowd is we help people in businesses create their crowd and then turn their crowd into a community. And the reason we help turn crowds into communities is because it's very important for you to be able to, as Kathleen said, reach out to people, not be afraid to ask these people for money. One of the things that I tell people all the time is that if there's a stranger walking down the street and you ask that stranger for $5, probably that stranger would look at you really strange and continue to walk. But if you turn that stranger into a friend and then you ask that stranger for $5, then you have a much better chance of getting the $5. As Kathleen said, it's all built about trust. It's all built on trust. So what we really focus on at Project Crowd is, how do we build that crowd? And crowdfunding is all about being able to tap into your social network from the inside out. Does everyone have a crowd? Absolutely. Every person has a crowd. And when I say every person has a crowd, what I mean by that is that when you start to think about who are the first people that you want to tell about this, well, the first people that you want to tell are people that you know. They're people that you can reach out to. They're people that you work with. They're people who are your customers, people who purchase from you, people who actually sell to you, and then people who care about you. The people who care about you, they may not have that big of an interest in what it is that you're doing, but they have an interest in you and seeing you to be successful. So I like to call that the inner circle. And anytime that we start this crowd building process, the first thing that we do is we like to tap that inner circle. How do you tap that inner circle? Where do you find that inner circle? Normally what I recommend is that you go through your email list and you look at all the people on your email list who you are in regular contact with, people that you're maybe doing business with, customers, people who are really going to listen to you and have your best interest at heart. And as you begin that process, then you're able to move out from that primary list of people. Then you're able to move out to a secondary and a tertiary. And as you get out to that tertiary area, what you're looking at is you're looking at people that you may not know personally, but what you do have is you share in common someone that you do know. I like to think about that as peer-to-peer marketing. And when I talk about that peer-to-peer marketing, companies will tell you anything all the time from their marketing department. And if you think about this in your own personal life, when a friend or someone that you trust tells you something about a campaign, about a product, about anything that you want to know about, that you may be thinking about buying about, then you're going to trust them a lot more than you would anybody else that's in that process. So when you start to tap that inner circle, then you move out and you move out. And what is the story that you tell people to make these people your friend? So one of the most important things about building a crowd and crowdfunding is, what is the story? How do I tell the story? Once I have that story crafted, once I have the message crafted, then we start talking about the tools that we use to disseminate that story. And as we start to build that crowd, we start to talk about social proof. What we talk about and what we're thinking about when we start talking about social proof is we're talking about the ability to get people to engage with you. I say there's one fundamental rule in crowdfunding, and that is, if you don't build an excited and engaged crowd, you will not get the funding that you're looking for. It's just that simple. One of the things that Kathleen talked about was investment crowdfunding. And when investment crowdfunding first came along in 2016, everyone rushed out to their lawyers, and they rushed out to talk to their CPAs about getting all their compliance documents done. And one of the first things that they found out was that because they didn't focus on the marketing, the PR, and building a crowd, that they didn't have any investors. So any type of crowdfunding that you have to build an engaged and excited crowd. If you don't do that, you are going to fall very short. So to finish this off, you start with your inner circle, and you start to tap that inner circle, and you move out. As you do that, then you have to have a really compelling story that engages and excites your crowd. Once you begin to get that crowd engaged and excited, tell that story, then the people in your crowd can begin to spread that. So one of the really valuable things about social media is that you can spread that exponentially. You can spread your message exponentially once you get people who are really excited and engaged in your crowd and what it is that you're talking about. The last thing I'll say here before I turn this over to Barry is that as you move through this process, Kathleen touched on this, but what's really important about crowdfunding is what I like to call the ROC and not the ROI. But what is my return on crowd? And there are so many benefits to building that excited and engaged crowd for any small business. Thank you, and I'll turn this over to Barry James now.
Thank you, Bill. It's great to be here. Thank you for the invite. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, great. So this is the reason I'm here with you today. I've been involved in crowdfunding here in the UK. You can tell I've got a funny accent here. For most of the last 10 years, and I've been involved getting this working nationally and so on. But the real reason I'm here today is because of the COVID crisis, and because what use is a funding mechanism if it can't help you? What use is crowdfunding if it can't meet some of the needs? And I'll tell you how we got into that. I'm going to go next slide quite a lot because we've got a lot of them and we're just going to flick through them. So that's just a little bit about my background, so you'll get that if you need it. Next slide, please. So we've already covered why we started with asking ourselves, could crowdfunding help people at this time of crisis, existing businesses, especially local and independent business? Next slide, please. And how that came about, it started with, it can work with many different kinds of businesses. This is a non-traditional form of crowdfunding. It's faster and than we thought it was possible to be, and there's good reasons for that. But we started when a member of our parliament rang us up, said, look, I've got this restaurant in my constituency, it's fallen through the cracks of government aid, or rather the chasms of government aid. It may not survive. Can you help? Next slide, please. We thought about that, and normally, if you're working with, if you are a startup, or if we're working with a startup, that can take some time, because building the crowd takes time. It's about building relationships. But we stepped back and we looked at this business that was frozen. Basically, the owner was coming in to sort of mop the floors every day and wondering how he was going to survive. And within the space of just over a week, we were able to use crowdfunding to move him from a place of being frozen to being completely re-engaged and raising the money needed to survive in the process. Next slide, please. So how did we do that? Next slide. Okay, so what we realized is many businesses, and not just hospitality businesses, other kind of businesses too, you know, had the classic things that you need in order to raise crowdfunding, and particular seed crowdfunding, or using the rewards model that was mentioned earlier on. It's the simplest, it has the lowest barriers. You can just go and do it, basically, if you know how to do it, or if you can find the right help to do it. And the mission was survival. The means were the products that they already had and people love. And the starting point was they had at least some customers there online, on their Facebook page. On the Monday, we had the first call, can we help? We quickly decided, yes, we can. Let's re-engineer the way this process works. By the Thursday, we had launched the first pivot crowdfund. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is at the end of the process, but very quickly that crowdfund took off, and the crowd here was already there. The crowd was the crowd of customers for this restaurant, both the ones that they already had on their Facebook page or on their email list, or the ones that they could reach out to through those. And the response was overwhelming. And you know, they, as you can see, they raised over £16,000, which is about $20,000 from 139 backers over the course of the campaign. Next slide, please. But more importantly than just the money, they reconnected with their customers, even during lockdown, and they changed and strengthened their relationship with their customers. And in that process of reconnection, along with the money came information, feedback, and in this case, new income streams, because that enabled and convinced the business owner that actually it did want to move to providing some takeaways, enthusiastically taken up. And he now has a cooking show and is doing online nights and so on as well. Next slide, please. So the program is, you know, very much an accelerated program. It's about reconnecting, both to survive lockdown, but also being ready to reopen. The crowd guiding your pivot, giving you the feedback you need to be sure-footed, rather than having to make guesses as to what's going to work and what isn't, as you tweak and change your business model, which is going to be a necessity. Finding more income streams, but most of all, perhaps, becoming resilient. So unfortunately, if you know we do get a second wave, if we do get lockdowns, the businesses we're now working with, and there's quite a range, are now more resilient because they have a lifeline and have an engaged audience. Next slide, please. And this is kind of in summary of that. So you know, we've managed to decrease all that uncertainty that was freezing Giuseppe in his place, didn't know where to go. and we've increased resilience by engaging customers through this process. This process is great because it gives great permission to go on a mission and to engage with customers, and increases loyalty and therefore funding and feedback. And you get happier customers out of this rather than the other way around. Next slide, please. And in fact, we've now working with a group called Excluded UK. This is a large 12,000 member group that are people who've been basically excluded from government help. Next slide, please. So crowdfunding is about the money, but it's about much more than the money. And in this scenario, yes, funding is needed to keep businesses alive when there's no income, and absolutely that's part of the mission. But it's also about engagement, about a different relation with customers. Next slide, please. And here's the definition. Customer engagement is the emotional or caring connection between a customer or a brand, and highly engaged customers buy more, promote more. Giuseppe now has some super fans who actually promote his business for him much more effectively than he can do himself, in fact, because they speak in a different way and from a different place. And next slide, please. So it's really summarizing what we were just saying about loyalty and resilience and being able to weather further lockdowns, a second wave or whatever. Next slide, please. So that's a brief overview. As I say, this is something that we've brought together and engineered specifically for the time we're in, but actually it fits very neatly with the challenge going forward, both now and post-COVID, for smaller and independent businesses who need to digitally engage and need to do what the big brands have already done and work out how best to relate to their customers, not just offline as footfall, but online as well. And at that point, bearing in mind time, I'll hand back to Christy. Thank you, Christy. Christy, I think you're muted.
Yes. Oh, there we go. Yes, I'm unmuted now. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you to all the panelists. This is this is one of those things that is I think you're demystifying. I think for me and hopefully for the people that are attending. Now, one of the things that I found really helpful in the discussion that we had before this was we had discussed some unsuccessful campaigns, and I'm gonna start with Bill, because Bill had mentioned, but you can all chime in. I think sometimes it's easy, instead of being told what to do, sometimes it's good to learn from the lessons of them, the lessons of others. So talk to me a little bit about some failed campaigns, some things you've seen in campaigns that have not worked. Because I think sometimes people think, oh, I'll just crowdfund, I'll just put it together. So, and Bill, you had some examples of a campaign or two, or elements of campaigns that you've seen that have been unsuccessful, and why.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. So first, I'd like to start out by giving a few statistics that come from Kickstarter. And when I start with those statistics, to understand the campaigns that are able to raise the first 30% of their goal in the first 48 hours are successful 78% of the time. That's really important, because what that tells you is that if you're able to build your crowd from the inside out, if you're able to tap your inner circle and build that out, then you have a much better chance of being successful. And for us at Project Crowd, that is our main theme, and that is what we look at. I remember working on a campaign with some people from France, and we had hired a social media company, and the social media company had managed to get all these likes. We had over 800 likes for the campaign. But what we didn't have was we didn't have any engagement at all. People weren't engaged. People, they just liked the campaign, but they weren't engaged. They weren't asking questions. We weren't providing answers. We weren't updating those people. And if you don't engage with your audience, if you don't engage with your crowd, then they're just a group of people online. So one of the things that we always talk about at Project Crowd is how do we turn that crowd into a community? And what I mean by that is these are people who are engaged. These are people who get up and they want to go to your campaign immediately. And what they want to see is what is the latest update? What has happened? They want to get to know you, not just your product. A lot of times in social media, what we have a tendency to do is we have a tendency to use these 21st century tools, but we use a 20th century marketing strategy where we're actually talking about, okay, just blasting a message out. We're not being social on social media. So I would say the most important part of any campaign is taking the time to build an excited and engaged crowd, no matter how long that period of time is. If it's 3 months, if it's 6 months, if it's one of those accelerated models like what Barry's talking about, if you don't have an excited and engaged crowd, from my experience, your campaign is going to fail.
Well, and then speaking about engagement, it's interesting because sometimes the thing that you think your customer is engaging with you on might not be the real thing that they're engaging on you with. That's a terrible sentence. But Kathleen, we had talked a little bit about the elements that make your campaign compelling, or the things that people find engaging in a business or in a campaign. And can you talk a little bit about how deconstructing the elements of a business that make it interesting or engaging for a crowdfunding campaign, or even just for a business in general?
So sure. I mean, Bill talked about story. I think what people assume is that it's just the business story. One of the things that differentiates crowdfunding from other types of fundraising is it's really about the human story behind the business story. So I've had clients who have put up flashy videos that are really jazzy and about their business and have raised no capital. And then they filmed a really heartfelt video talking to people about why their business was important to them and what they wanted to bring to the community. And then the community engaged with them. So the honesty, we say at Crowdfund Better, honesty before flashy. Through the fingerprints, let them see the human beings. And people say, well, people already know what I need. And the truth is, people don't know what you need until you ask. When you make that ask, you open a space where people can come in and support you in the ways that you're asking and in ways that you never imagined. They'll come up with ways to support you that, are out of the box and maybe more successful than the things you've asked for. So talking about that story, and then also thinking about problems and solutions. So it may be very clear to you what your business does and its value, but your job is to help people understand and what the value is to them. What is the problem that you're trying to solve in the community, and what is the solution that you've come to? So those are important pieces to include in your story, whether that's your video story or your campaign story. So I think that's the heart of getting the message to your customers, community, and beyond.
And I want to remind people that you can type questions in the chat, and I'll be looking for those. I can look down here, and that I think that sometimes, and I'm speaking from experience, I'll pretend it's other people. Sometimes certain personality types, find it hard to kind of hear the real content that is right in front of you. Like when people are offering you things, when you're asking for one thing and they're offering you something different, it can be hard to hear that. Like that, and on our call, we talked a little bit about like listening and to the data. And so maybe I'm talk a little bit about sort of how to read the messages of what you get back from your information on your crowdfunding.
Happy to. Okay. So the great thing about, a crowd fund is it's a way of creating a two-way communication channel between you and, in the case of a startup, your potential users, your supporters, in the mission, or in case of a business, your customers, and engaging them in a conversation. And when you build a seed crowdfund or a rewards crowdfund, you offer a range of options and rewards, usually from a very low value to a much higher value, and you get feedback on that, and it's real feedback. It's much better than you get from a focus group who are people trying to figure out what they might think about this. That these are real customers and real people who are already engaged with your businesses, in business, and they're giving you real data, real feedback, and they can help you steer your business because they're like a brains trust for you. Another way is, as you allude, Christy, we have data on now 750,000 crowdfunds from around the world. So that's really helpful. We can kind of look into the different places and cities in the world and niches and see that the different niches have very different dynamics. So, if you're in a niche that has certain dynamics, the success rates are very much higher in things like, would you believe, board games and comics and so on. Really high success rates. Quite often they're 70 or 80%, much lower in a lot of other areas. That's a lesson from the data. But my kind of favorite data story is one for a case study from my book, which was an entrepreneur we know called Rich Mills, who had a great project for a sleep monitoring device, and he he went and did a crowdfund on that and failed. It was one of those great failed campaigns we were talking about earlier on. Then he got a £500,000 in VC money as a result of that failed campaign. Well, you'd think, why? The reason was data that he was able to show to the VC, and this happened within weeks. He was able to show to the VC that there really was a demand, what the demographic was, and what the cost of reaching that audience would be, and so on. So actually, instead of having a woolly idea that and a lot of uncertainty, it was able to reduce that and give data that the VC was able to go, yeah, absolutely, £500,000.
Which speaks to an earlier point of, you might not realize what you're going to get from this at the first pass. The kind of the benefit of what you're first getting, going for, might not be what the ultimate return on this on the exercise, right? If you
Sorry, could you not quite?
Yeah, I got a few. I don't know if it's just my air conditioner. I don't know. I got a note that there's feedback. I don't have a fan or anything on. I'll try to speak closer. I was saying so it turns out that the first one was a failure, you're saying, but then in
this case, that led directly to a big funding event from a VC. But it is all, crowdfunding is also a great process of discovery. And someone once said that the best preparation for a successful crowdfund is sometimes a failed crowdfund. You learn huge amounts of lessons about what works, what doesn't, and you build an audience. And one of the things that people often don't kind of factor in or get is that when you build an audience, it's a great asset to be built on. So you're not just creating something for a one-off event and then move away, not if you're wise anyway. Crowdfunding is very definitely a fantastic mechanism, for growing, as Bill was saying before, it actually provides tools to build the crowd and to build on success or sometimes failure as well.
So there's a lot of questions about recommendations for which platform, which crowdfunding platform. Do any of you on the panel have recommendations for the various and sundry crowdfunding platforms?
Well, I'll jump in here. There was a question that I answered, said, well, what's the right one for my business? And it's very difficult to answer that without knowing what type of business, what stage of business, if you have revenue, if you don't have revenue, do you have a product? So there are a lot of factors. But Crowdfund Better has a cheat sheet on our website. It's free to download it. And it lists the different types of crowdfunding, different platforms, and it's a great place to start for you to go and look. What I would say is look for platforms that have campaigns like yours. That's the best way to tell, because if campaigns that look like yours are successful on that platform, then likely that would be a good place for you to try to crowdfund.
Yeah, there's a lot of mythology around this, and very often the first question that people want to ask is which platform. And actually, it comes at the end of, logically, it comes at the end of, a process that helps you to understand, what you're doing and your audience and so on. So, it isn't such a big question. And to be perfectly frank, a lot of the platforms mislead people into thinking that what really matters is the crowd that's already on the platform, and that's not true. What matters is you are going to be bringing your own crowd. You're going to be building your own crowd. You may get a little bit of, wind beneath your wings on occasion from a platform that will give you a bit of assist, but it's by no means guaranteed. And by the way, I'm going to declare an interest here that after 5-6 years of resisting the possibility, we now have our own platform, which we think is wonderful, but I'm not going to talk about it.
Well, you know what? I say, plug it in the chat, and people can check your platform in the chat. I've moved locations to try and be in a better sound location. I think most platforms that promise you the world are usually platforms that I'm suspicious of. We know, because we have Made in DC as one of the programs that we have, which is a lot of makers, a lot of creatives, and it makes me think that what we have businesses that are good at what they do, but this seems like a particular skill set, and a lot of you talked about building your crowd, which also seems like a particular skill set. And maybe how do you do that? So if you're not an extrovert and you're not good at asking for things, how do you do that?
I would say that, as Kathleen had mentioned before about her questions, if you can't do that, if you're not willing to do that, you're just not going to be successful at crowdfunding. That you have to be willing not to just ask people for things, but you have to be willing to be the major cheerleader. You have to be the person who is out front leading those cheers. No one knows and understands your business better than you do. Again, as Kathleen touched on, no one that business, that story that's around your business, that is your story. So you have to be willing to tell that story as truthfully as you can, and to be able to really reach out and touch those heartstrings of people. When I think about building an email list, when I think about building a crowd, an email list is obviously the most important part of that, but there are two parts to that. There's the messaging and the story, and then there's the technology, and that focus has to be on the messaging and the story. And once you kind of get out there and do it, I think even if you're an introvert, you'll get used to it.
So you mentioned email list, and we have we have a question from the audience. It says, how do you grow an email list to start a crowdfunding campaign from a podcast? We have
I would have thought this one for you, Bill.
Okay. Well, again, the way you grow your email list, and again, it's not so much the focus on the tools, right? Whether it's a podcast, whether it's Facebook, those are the things that are not so important. What is important is that you begin that process by being able to tap the people in your inner circle, the people who care about you. If you do have a podcast, the people who listen to you, the people who engage with your podcast. They are the obvious first people that you want to reach out to, because you already have a relationship with them. You're already engaged with those people. So what you want to do is you want to take those people and you want to begin to drive them to that email list. I'll tell a quick story about a campaign that I did that I thought was very interesting. Barry had mentioned a board game. So we were doing a board game, and that board game was about cricket. So I don't know. I didn't know very much about cricket at the point, when I took on the campaign. But what we did was we targeted Facebook ads to people around the world who played cricket in countries where they played cricket. And we were able to build an email list using Facebook ads to target people in countries where they played cricket. Built that email list. There was a terrific story behind the board game because the man who made the board game had spent like 20 years creating this game. And we were able to successfully fund a Kickstarter campaign on people who were not actually from the United States, but were from countries where they played cricket. Again, the most important part of this aspect of building that crowd and building out that email list is being able to tell a story that is engaging and being able to engage with those people. If people engage with your story, they're going to share that mission, they're going to share that message, and that's going to help you to grow that exponentially.
Yeah. And I guess in which medium you're in, really, what you're doing is what you might call an ethical bribe, where you're offering people on the blog or whatever something they might like, a little bit of extra material or rather, in exchange for their email address so that they can download it and whatever mechanically.
So here's another question we have, which is, what are the regulatory or compliance requirements for crowdfunding and the maximum amount of money that can be raised?
Well, I'll jump in here. It depends on the type of crowdfunding. So we said there's 4 different types. Donation and rewards, there really isn't any limit on upper limit. With lending, right now, Kiva has a $15,000 lending limit. With investment, it depends on the exemption that you're using. So for example, regulation crowdfunding is a federal exemption. The limit there is $1,070,000 at the moment, although there's some rule changes that may come into place in the next few months to raise that to $5 million. With 506C, which is a different exemption, that's only for accredited investors, and that has no upward limit. So it really depends on the type, and then within investment, what regulation you're going to use, because also different states have different regulatory limits on what you can raise.
So we've got a question here saying, how do businesses that have no rewards or perks for donors frame the return on investment?
It depends which kind of crowdfunding they're doing. If it's return on investment and equity crowdfunding, it's usually shares in the business in some form or another, or some other financial instrument or return. But if we're talking about rewards, rewards can be a very creative process. So even a business that is direct product, it doesn't kind of lend itself to being a reward, can have, you can get very creative about creating events that people want to come to, the merchandise, calendars, you know, and lots of other stuff. There's some of the other experts in the room can talk about maybe some of those, but it can be a very creative process.
So I think there still continues to be some confusion between like straight fundraising and crowdfunding out there. As I look through some of the questions, there's a question here about how does crowdfunding compare to fundraising or obtaining sponsorships?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the key difference, another way that I describe crowdfunding is it's old-fashioned barn raising using new digital tools. So it's about gathering people together, not just for the experience of helping you, but to be with each other. There's a sense with crowdfunding that it's not just you to the person, but that you're also gathering a group of people who also have an affinity for each other. So that's something that's different from, I'm just going to donate $10 to, you know, a national nonprofit. The other is that crowdfunding is really about exchange and shared risk. So by that, I mean, you know, when you do rewards crowdfunding, you're offering someone something in exchange for their contribution. And both of you are taking a risk. So the business owner is going to try to deliver on, for example, a new product. And the contributor is going to say, okay, I'm going to give that a shot. I'm going to give that, you know, I'm going to put my money down and hope for that. But there is an element of shared risk that when we contribute our money to those campaigns, we are working to create solutions to problems that we see. So there's a real community aspect and a relationship. I think that's something I've heard Barry say and Bill say many times in this presentation. It's not just transactional. It's not also one-sided. It's a relationship.
Mm-hmm. So just as I'm watching the time, we've got a little over 5 minutes left, just to make sure we're watching the time here. I have a question here about ads. Do you recommend Facebook ads over Instagram or Twitter ads? Or maybe I'm broadening that question to what's your stance on advertising for your crowdfunding?
Well, from my perspective, the ads really don't make that big of a difference. You know what type of ads you use, especially if you're talking about Facebook and Instagram, because they're both owned by Facebook. I use Facebook ads, but the way I use Facebook ads is I use those Facebook ads to build my email list. That email list in the crowdfunding world is gold, and the reason I say that is because if people hear about you through Twitter, those people convert at about 3%. People who hear about you through Facebook, they convert at about 12%. People who hear about you and engage with you through email convert at 53%. So for me, the goal is always to build that email list. I use Facebook ads to build the email list. That email list is yours. One of the values of a successful crowdfund campaign is that you get to go away with the email list. So the email list is the most important. However you decide to run ads, it's fine. I think that ads are important because of your ability to be able to target the audience that you're looking for. But the type of ads you run are not really that important as long as you're comfortable running those ads.
And now we've got another question about, and Virginia Maria, we will follow up with questions. We're not going to get to all of these questions. But speaking of these ads, we had a question earlier about when somebody joins the campaign, does the platform have their name and contacts, or is that only like who owns the contact names on the when you're on a different platform? Does the platform own those contacts, or do you own those contacts?
Both. The answer to that is the platform has that email contact, but to be specific, different types of crowdfunding, you get the email contacts and some you don't. So for example, with rewards, investment, and donation crowdfunding, you, the campaign creator, get, in the majority of cases, will get the email list. So let me back up. In rewards and investment, the platform gets the email, you get the email. Now, anyone who backs your campaign can unsubscribe from the platform's email list and your email list. In crowd lending, so on Kiva, you don't actually get the direct emails of the people who back your campaign. On GoFundMe, you don't get the emails of the people who back your campaign. So that's a reason to think about using something besides GoFundMe for a campaign for your business, because you won't get those email contacts. Some donation platforms you do. So I would read the fine print on the platform to find out what information you will receive. And some of them, it's only if your campaign is successful. So again, that's very usually clear in their FAQs. So just do a little digging.
So check first, because as Bill says, the emails are gold. So I'm going to ask one last question, and I'm going to give a little time for everybody to give a final statement. Is it wise to crowdfund during the pandemic for the rest of the year? That's open to anybody.
So shall I start
Yes.
on that one?
All right, yeah, Barry.
So, although my answer, I suppose, is going to be obvious, because pivot crowdfunding is just that. So yes, obviously, you know, you need to be sensitive to the environment that you're crowdfunding into and the audience that you're crowdfunding to. But you know, there's no shutting up of shop. In fact, you know, it's needed more, and it is there as a mechanism, in many ways, as we're proving with the pivot program, is an ideal mechanism to help people through, to help businesses through in this phase.
And I'll add to that, investment crowdfunding platforms are having their highest volume of investors that they've seen. So, you know, there's some evidence that people are interested in supporting small business directly. And BackerKit, which is tracking campaigns, has also said that the volumes are holding steady. So we're not seeing a decline specifically because of the pandemic.
We are almost at our time, and so I will ask each of our panelists just for a final with regard to crowdfunding and our topics. And I get Kathleen, you're right now, so I'll ask you to go first. Any final parting thoughts?
I would say preparation. So your better bet is, if you feel prepared, is to wait, do more preparation, and then launch. You can't make a mistake by waiting and to get ready, getting those tools underneath you before you launch.
All right, Bill, how about you? Final thoughts?
Yeah, my answer is going to be very similar to what Kathleen said. Once you hit that go button, time is against you. So you definitely want to make sure that you are prepared. And to touch on that question before that last question, one thing I would want to say is that whether you're crowdfunding or not, engaging your community throughout the year and as much as you can is always going to be important. You don't always have to ask your crowd, your community, for money. You can tell them how well you're doing with the money you were able to raise for them. So it's about engagement and building that relationship. That's what crowdfunding is about.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Bill. All right, Barry, final thoughts?
Final thought is, it's amazing actually what this technology, this paradigm can do, particularly in the scenario where we're just beginning to get people to understand the power of this and how widely it's applicable. So my final thought would be, don't just think about this for your you know, if you're a business person, for your own business, but maybe that too, but also think about the other people around you. We all live near businesses that we care about, and spread the word, because actually this is a form of life support that is badly needed, I'm sure, in many places in the USA as well as here in the UK.
Oh, thank you. My final thought is that we did this because we were interested in learning about innovative ways to help infuse businesses with money. But I think I walk away with realizing that this is an innovative way to infuse businesses with more than money, with longer term resilience. And I think that if done properly, it really does help the long-term viability of the business. And I really appreciate the time that the three of you from various places around the world have given to this topic for our businesses. I'm deeply grateful for the time and the expertise you've lent to us. And we will we'll post this. This is recorded, so we'll hopefully make this available for other people to watch. And we'll probably be reaching out to you for other questions and expertise. But thank you very much for sort of opening our minds and opening the door to this conversation for us. It has been very insightful, very helpful. So, and to the people in the chat, thank you very much for coming. I'm Christy Whitfield. I'm the director of the Department of Small and Local Business, and we are happy to be a resource to you. We're a DSLPD, dc.gov, and this was a chat brought to you by our Innovation and Equitable Development Department, Kate Marin and her team. Thank you to Kate and to Virginia Marie and Shannon and James Partlow and all the people that put this together. So thank you all very, very much. All right. Thanks, guys. All right. Bye, everybody.